Welcome to Give Me Space episode 3, where you'll have to put up with the neighbours' dog barking. Since the last episode, things have really been mounting up, so today we're going to discuss mounts for your camera or for your telescope. A slight digression before we proceed. Since the camera video, I came into a bit of pocket money and treated myself to a dedicated astro camera. True to my word, it's a colour planetary camera and uncooled. There was no local stock when I came to buy it, so I bought it direct from the manufacturer, and I noticed that they had a passive assisted cooling kit for it. It's not active Peltier cooling, it's just a heatsink with a fan attached that goes onto the back of the camera and reduces the, intended to reduce the temperature of the sensor by a few degrees. Probably worthwhile having on the warm nights that we get here, because it'll drop the sensor temperature from the critical sort of down to a bit cooler. I've done a little bit of testing, and it limits the temperature rise in the sensor to about 2.9 degrees. It's a Uranus, Player 1 Uranus C one-shot colour camera, 8 megapixels, and I'll do a bit of a report on it later. Anyway, back to mounts. Let me just put that away. With astrophotography, the mount's everything. The camera and telescope needs to be free from vibration and unintended movement, otherwise the images you're trying to create won't be clear. Mounts that are good enough for visual observing will generally not be good enough for astrophotography. You may find that even in beginner territory that you need to pay more for a mount than you do for what you put on it. Without a good platform to mount your optical equipment on, you won't be able to get the best results from the camera or the telescope you put on the mount. I'm going to start with tracking mounts here because you're going to need one, then move on to what to stand the camera mount and everything on. It is possible to get some good medium field images of deep sky objects, but the technique is limited and fairly complex. If you're going to do nothing but take wide field shots or planets, then you can get away without a mount, or get away without a tracking mount. But if you want to use medium to long focal lengths to image deep sky objects, even big ones, then you're going to need a tracker. Planets don't need a tracker because they're very bright, and you can image them with short exposures even though you need long focal lengths to see any detail. Let's explain the problem and how trackers are the solution. The stars and other celestial objects actually have the courtesy to stay relatively still, but we on the planet Earth don't. The Earth rotates on its axis once every 23 hours, 56 minutes and 4 and a bit seconds, making it look like the stars are moving at a rate of about 15 degrees per hour. As I've mentioned before, this doesn't seem to be much of a problem, but if you try and take a photo with even a 100mm lens and an exposure time of 10 or so seconds, long enough to collect enough photons to actually see what it is you're trying to take the photo of, then you'll get motion blur. At 600mm, you're down to about a second or less of exposure time. So what you need is some kind of a device that counteracts the rotation of the Earth, basically keeping the camera in the same orientation relative to the stars while the Earth turns under it. That's what a star tracker or a tracking mount does. In its simplest form, it's an electric motor with a gearbox that reduces the rotation of the motor to the 15 degrees per hour needed to counteract the rotation of the Earth. Some do this more accurately than others, and accuracy is where some of the money goes. The gear train needs to be made to a reasonable standard to get the right tracking rate and also consistent over time. To make a tracker work, the rotation axis of the platform that the camera or telescope sits on has to be aligned to your local celestial pole. Here in Australia, it's the southern celestial pole, while in the north, well, you use the northern celestial pole. Near the equator, I suppose you either have a choice or you can't use either. The commonest way of performing that alignment to the celestial poles is with a combination of informed estimation and optical refinement. More on that later. Enough of looking at me, let's have a look at an actual star tracker. I think you can broadly divide tracking mounts into two rough categories. There are the light duty mounts like this, designed primarily to take a camera, but can take a small telescope plus a camera. They're relatively cheap and with adequate tracking accuracy. Heavier duty mounts dedicated for telescopes and attached equipment are more expensive to very expensive and better to best in the tracking accuracy department. Let's look at this light duty mount first, as they're the cheapest, the most portable, and probably the easiest to get started with. Need some tea. This is my Skywatcher Star Adventurer. It's one of the several options on the market from Skywatcher and a few other manufacturers. This is not a recommendation to buy one of these, it's just what I decided to get for myself. The other main brand in this type of tracker is a company called Ioptron. I'd recommend you look at their offerings as well if you're looking at buying something like this. This is the platform that the camera would mount on, and it rotates at various speeds depending on what you're doing. It has settings for tracking stars and planets which move at a slightly different rate, the sun, etc., plus custom speeds for doing non-astro time-lapse images. It has a small telescope running through the middle, which is used to align it to the celestial north or south pole. I won't go into the details of how to do that in this video. Just remember that it's called a polar scope because it's a term that you're going to need to get familiar with. This is the mode dial where you set what you want it to do, and on the other side here we have a switch to set which hemisphere you're in. That reverses the direction the motor turns, because in the north the front of the mount will point north and in the southern hemisphere it will point south. So the stars will rotate from left to right. With north orientation the stars rotate from right to left. You don't use the mode dial much on this 2i version because the mount has a built-in Wi-Fi hotspot, and you can connect to that with a phone or tablet and control the mount with an app. This particular mount has a few extra ports on it. Okay, this is a USB port for power. It takes onboard batteries in this battery box as well, and optionally computer control in this model. This is a snap port that can be used to control a DSLR type camera. Many of these mounts have a programmable intervalometer built in them that you can set to take, say, 50 shots of 60 seconds each, whatever you determine is the best choice for your target. That's all set up via the app. This is an ST4 guide port. It's used to improve the accuracy of the rotation by using a feedback loop from a specialised guide camera. Some people hate ST4, but it works fine and it's simple to get going. I think this version of this mount can be guided by the USB port as well. Haven't tried that yet. It's an experiment for the future. To use a tracker like this, you need to mount it on a stand of some kind, usually a tripod, or if you're a bit handy, you could make a pier. You often have an option to get a matching tripod when you buy a small tracker like this. I had a fairly basic but sturdy tripod I bought for the barn door tracker I built, as my camera tripod was too weak for the weight of the tracker. I repurposed the telescope tripod for the tracker. in this case, the tracker has a camera style mount in the base, and the tripod has a matching threaded stud, so it goes together like this. Look at that, went first time. If you're going to get a tracker and you don't have a tripod, see if the tracker has an optional tripod and get that. They tend not to be too expensive, and they do a good job. Now, to set the tracker up, I'd align it roughly to the pole by setting it up to point magnetic south, and then tilt it to match the rotational axis of the Earth. Fortunately, our angle from the horizontal to point to your local celestial pole is the same as your latitude. You can use an app on a phone to find your latitude, and also I use an app to find the correct angle. I use a magnetic compass to find the southern alignment, because I find that the compass app on my phone is all over the place. It's also worth noting that the celestial pole is not the same as magnetic south or north, but in my case it's very close. You need to know the magnetic declination of your location to work out the offset. This can be quite important. As I mentioned, in my location, the difference between the direction to the southern celestial pole, which is at true south, and the south magnetic pole is about 1.6 degrees, which is not very much. In Sydney, the difference is currently nearly 13 degrees, so over there you'd need to compensate for that when you're setting the mount up. Okay, once you've got it set up pointing at the angle that matches your latitude and true south, you refine the adjustment using the polar scope on the back here. Theoretically, whatever star or stars you should use to align should be visible in the scope if your rough adjustment is good, but in my case I'm too ham-fisted and I have to hunt around to find the stars to align to every time I set it up. Once you get it set up, you cannot move the base of the mount after that. By the way, since polar alignment in the southern hemisphere is a bit of a trial, I'm thinking of doing a video on that. It can be a bit of an adventure if you're in a city, because the sky is not dark enough to see the stars that you need to align to. I mean, and by stars, I mean that in the northern hemisphere you have a notable star close to the stellar pole called, of all things, Polaris. I mean, what kind of a name is that? In the southern hemisphere we've got no such thing. The South Polar region is notable for its lack of stars. In the south we have to align to a group of faint stars in a constellation called octans. They're hard to see with the naked eye, even in a clear, dark sky, so a southern alignment is, it's interesting. Tripods designed to take star trackers don't have the tilt head like this. You need another accessory, yes, another bit to bolt on. Astronomy wouldn't be astronomy without all that, would it? Called an equatorial wedge. This one from Skywatcher is specifically for the Star Adventurer. It's essentially a hinge with a scale on it and a screw that allows you to dial in your latitude. This is how it's used. When it's fitted, you keep the head level and adjust the latitude. Can't. Okay, so what we need to do is take that off there. Sorry about that, just had to have a bit of a conversation with a threaded stud that wouldn't come out. Okay, what were we talking about? Okay, to use the equatorial wedge, that basically goes onto the tripod. That basically goes onto the tripod, he says. And there we go. In place of the mount. And the tripod base itself actually sits level. This has a little bubble level in it to make sure that the wedge is level in both axes. And you have a screw on the front here that you use to set the latitude from this scale, which you probably can't see on the front here. Set that to about right for me. Lock the clutch. Okay, lock the mount, and then in this particular mount you have this mounting block that goes on. And we'll just tighten that up so it doesn't all fall on the floor. And then that would slip in like that. So if this tilt is set to the equivalent of your latitude, and this is pointing at the true south or true north, whatever is appropriate for your direction, then this platform here will, when it rotates, he says trying to release the clutch, when this platform rotates, then it will follow it'll rotate the camera so it tracks the stars. I've seen that some people don't like this wedge and get a better one by a company called Williams Optics. The Williams Optics wedge is $350 in Australia, which I suppose could be justified if you already have a Star Adventurer, but if you don't, I'd just put the extra money into getting a more heavy duty mount. Anyway, this is how you can fit a camera. In this configuration, you normally use a camera ball head like this. And speaking of accessories, this green bit here is a Skywatcher accessory that you can get to use with the Star Adventurer to fit a camera. How far out do you got to go? Okay, that goes there like that. The clutch. Where are we? Taking that around. And mount the camera. Nearly. Where have I got these? That one. Okay. Did that the wrong way. Should really have that pointing there, but like for the purposes of the video, we all get the hint here. So as you can see, when the camera mounted like that, then as I mentioned, when the mount is tracking, you can see that it will rotate the camera at a rate of 15 degrees per hour to track the stars. This is okay for objects like the Magellanic Clouds that you can see with the naked eye, but it gets interesting if you can't see your target object. You have to find a notable star near your subject and adjust to where you think your subject might be. Take a picture to see if you can see it, make another adjustment, rinse, repeat. It can take some time to do that. To help with camera pointing, I actually mount a red dot finder on the camera hot shoe. That really locates targets more easily. It really helps to locate targets more easily. And red dot finders are not very heavy, so it's not a lot of weight to add. If you wanted to mount a camera with a longer lens or a small telescope, then this ball head setup is not stable enough. Skywatcher has an accessory, there you go, there's that word again, called a fine tuning mount that effectively turns this into a dual axis telescope mount, which is also better for cameras. And we just happen to have one of those that I can show you. To To use the fine-tuning mount, you remove the camera and the ball head and attach the fine-tuning adapter like this. And make sure it's done up so you don't drop it. And to take that off. What was I saying about adapters? And that mounts the camera there, like that. The fine-tuning mount comes with a counterweight assembly, so you can mount heavier equipment as well. It makes it also makes the mount more stable for tracking with just a camera mounted on it. The fine-tuning mount has a worm drive here that gives you manual movement in the declination, which is the left-right axis, and also motor drive in the right ascension axis. With this particular mount, Skywatcher sells a kit with the tracker and all the accessories included, and that's the most economical way to buy it. The street price in Australia for the whole kit is a bit under $700 dues. For reference, it's called the Skywatcher Star Adventurer 2i Pro Pack. Slight digression here. I need to use the term hour angle to describe the operation of tracking mounts. The first term I need to clarify is the meridian or the local meridian. The local meridian is an imaginary line that joins the northern and southern celestial poles and runs through your observing position. Basically, if you can imagine a line from the southern celestial pole right overhead to the northern celestial pole, or from northerner the other way around. For astronomy purposes, you can extend that line directly upwards into a plane that defines directly overhead for your exact location. When I say exact, I mean you take one step east or west of your current location and your local meridian changes by the same amount. You don't need to get that picky in practice. The hour angle of an object is related to its right ascension and your local meridian. The right ascension value of an object is a fixed value expressed usually in hours, minutes and seconds. The hour angle of an object is a relative value expressed in hours, minutes and seconds, and it's the time since the object crossed your local meridian. So basically it's the time since the object was last on that line that goes straight up from your local position. So an object that's directly overhead or straight in front of you will have an hour angle of 0 or 24. As it moves to the west, the hour angle will increase up towards 24 until it crosses your local meridian again. You can work out the hour angle with a formula based on the longitude of your local meridian and the right ascension of the object, but the best way is just to look at the details for the object in an astronomy app on your phone, tablet or preferred device. In short, knowing the hour angle tells you how far around the sky, the rotation of the sky, the object is. An hour angle of 18-ish means that it's just rising, and 6-ish means that it's just setting if the object is close to the celestial equator. Objects closer to the celestial pole are visible over a wider range of hour angles. Objects close to the pole may never set, so at an hour angle of 12 they will be directly below the pole. Now, getting back to the mount and explaining why I just explained about hour angles, etc. This setup works pretty well, but it has a downside I think is common to all these basic mounts, and that is there's no precise way to determine where to point the camera, even if you know the right ascension or the hour angle and the declination. They don't have setting circles, the setting circles you need to determine those values, and with only one axis being motor driven, there's no go-to option. There's a numbered ring on the back here of the Star Adventurer, and it looks like a right ascension setting circle, but it's actually a calendar thingo that I think is used to set up Polaris correctly. The calibration is months and days, not hours or degrees, which would be more typical of a declination scale. What I've done is followed a video by a guy called Camille Picala and added a declination scale to the fine-tuning mount like so. You can hopefully see it up there. His video has a bit about taking a video of the mount as it rotates and using the video to derive the hour angle from the date scale. That bit lost me. The logical thing to do for me would be to make a scale in degrees or hours and stick it over the calendar scale on the back here. But the scale is conical and that makes it hard to stick on a flat overlay. It'd be nice if Skywatch offered a stick-on overlay instead of the date thing, because the date thing, especially in the southern hemisphere, is I don't think it's any use to me. Anyway, what I did was set up a longitude scale. Here there's a little subscale on the back here, and I set that up to 0 when the mount was in the straight up position, and by straight up it's actually when it's the camera is horizontal like that. Let me just turn that around. Okay, in that position the camera tracks along the 0 hour angle. I made a table of 5-degree increments to the left and the right of the 0 axis and made up a little cheat sheet that I'll put still in the video. It allows you to determine the hour angle position from -6 hours to +6 hours with the western and eastern horizon in the southern hemisphere. I think for northerners the values might have to be reversed, not sure. As I mentioned, I'll put a still of the chart here in the video so you can stop the video and copy it. Due to weeks of bad weather, otherwise known as winter, and in this case early spring, I've not really tested it fully yet, but I think it actually does work. If anyone's interested, I'll do a more detailed video on the method, but there's a link below to Mr. Picala's video, and it's really interesting to look at that and give him a like. Anyway, the point is that these basic mounts take a lot of faffing around to set up, and darkness is valuable. There is, however, a solution. The day after I ordered this mount, Skywatch released the Star Adventurer GTI. This is very similar to this mount, but it has a go-to capability. What that means is that both the right ascension and declination axes are motor driven, so once you have the polar alignment done, you can use the app to select a target and the mount will just turn itself to point the camera at it. I think it also has the mysterious encoders, which means the mount can determine where it's pointed in the sky. So there's likely to be some interesting software options in the future, such as refinement of the polar alignment using star positions. The GTI Star Adventurer also does away with this stock add-on wedge. It's a much sturdier body. If I was buying a first tracker now, that's what I would get. It's more expensive at about $1,000 Australian, but if you have the budget, it's money well spent. There's also a smaller go-to mount from Skywatch called the AZ GTI. Worth a look if your budget is at the $700 mark, as it has the same load limit as the Star Adventurer mounts. This mount and the GTI both have a 5 kilo mount limit, weight limit. But I don't think the AZ GTI has a polar scope. If it doesn't, you'd not be able to get as good a polar alignment as with the Star Adventurer series. One thing I should mention as a plus for the Star Adventurer mounts is how the app works. when you set up the camera parameters in the app, they're sent to the mount, and the mount is programmed from that point on with those parameters. If you want to run a session with the same exposure length, shutter speeds, number of shots, etc. that you set up before, then you just align the mount, get your object in the field of view, connect the camera, and then set the mode dial to track instead of app, and off it goes. The camera will be controlled with the last set of parameters you entered. You don't have to fire up the app, connect the Wi-Fi, etc. It's really simple. Speaking of load limits, one of the things I found is that the quoted load limit for a mount seems to be for visual astronomy. There's a rule of thumb that you should limit astrophotography gear to about half of the load limits. So for a Star Adventurer, this would be about 2.5 kilo or 5.5 pounds in the old money. It's not a problem with a camera and lens combo, or even a small telescope and a DSLR. The other unspoken factor in tracking mounts, in tracking mount loads, is the focal length of the lens telescope. Lighter, cheaper mounts like this tend to be less stable with wind and vibration, and also tend not to track as accurately as the more expensive and more precise mounts. This will limit the focal length you can use with a given mount. I don't have a formula you can use, but I found a largish light 600mm refractor was not usable on the Star Adventurer if there was any wind at all. See that there's a problem that I don't think there's any formula you can use to determine the suitability of a specific mount for optical gear with a given focal length. You probably just have to rely on your own experience or the experience of others. Just see what other people are using and what results that they get, and match that to the mount you actually have. So what about a normal telescope motorised equatorial mount that you often see advertised with telescopes? Wouldn't that do the job? Yeah, to a degree I think it would, but I think they tend to be designed with visual astronomy in mind. When looking through an eyepiece, your eye-brain processes can filter out small irregularities, but a camera can't do so. And a relatively cheap equatorial mount may work at shorter focal lengths, but not longer ones. What focal lengths can be used, I don't know. It depends on the quality and accuracy of the mount. I've never tried a stock motorised equatorial mount for a telescope for astrophotography, so I can't really give authoritative advice on that. So what about these barn door trackers or Scots trackers that you see? They seem to have about the same limitation as the cheap equatorial mounts. I built an Arduino controlled one and play with it extensively, trying to improve the performance. In the end I realised that maybe I should give up and direct the increasing expenditure towards getting something that actually does the job properly. In short, I just couldn't get it to work to my satisfaction. If you're going to go the telescope route and the total mass of your telescope, camera, etc. is more than 2.5 kilos, or you want to use longer focal lengths, it needs more accuracy and stability, then your best option is a more telescope-oriented mount. One of the best ways to determine if this is a good option for you is to watch YouTube videos and see what other people are using. Search for videos featuring mounts like the Ioptron Skyguider Pro or the Skywatcher Star Adventurer, and see if the reviews and the experiences match what you're looking to do. If the equipment that people are using looks too lightweight, then a more telescope oriented solution might be better for you. But be warned, the heavier duty mounts can get very expensive very quickly as their weight limits ramp up. Now, after being the small budget approach advocate, I feel a bit hypocritical saying this, but there are not really any cheap and cheerful solutions to this particular problem. Given that the mount is the most restrictive part of your kit, then get the best mount that you can afford once you get a picture of what it is that you want to do. So let's look at the pros and cons of going bigger. The pros. Larger mounts tend to have more physical stability. They have a larger weight and higher focal length capability. Usually better tracking accuracy because the higher price allows the manufacturer to provide a better drivetrain. they can have a better standard of software options from the manufacturer, but aftermarket support from open source software is often as good, if not better. Setup can be a bit easier, but you still need to polar align to a reasonable degree. Okay, the cons. The cons tend to be, well, the most notable one is that they're more expensive, and this is disproportionate to load capability. The heavier the load you can put on, this like a curve that the load increases like that, and the price increases like that. The physical size and weight, a relatively big robust mount can be surprisingly heavy, and they may not take as big a load as you think. They also tend not to be as user-friendly. They have more control options, and they can be more difficult to use. And so they might not be suitable for somebody who just wants to do some basic astrophotography. So let's have a look at a heavier duty mount. This is a Skywatcher HEQ5, where the Star Adventurer series is designed for mounting cameras but could be used for a small telescope. This type of mount is designed first and foremost as a telescope mount. There's no default option for camera threads on the mounting platform here. This foot is for telescope mounting rails like Vixen or Los Mandy rails, but you could mount a camera on it with some playing around. This mount is physically much heavier than the Star Adventurer. This head itself weighs 12 kilos or 25 pounds, and it's relatively light compared to even bigger, more robust mounts. For example, the bigger EQ6 head weight is 17 kilos, which is in the vicinity of a bag of cement. If, like me, you live in a marginal area for astrophotography and you need a degree of portability, this is portable, but it's hardly grab and go. This is unlike the telescope mount. This doesn't just swivel around. So with the ports on this, there's no snap port or USB port on this mount. If you go up to this in the Skywatcher range, then you get USB and snap mounts ports back, but not on these mid-range ones. You can control it from a computer using a weird USB to RJ45 cable that has a USB to serial converter built in. It's actually an old-fashioned serial port control with non-standard connector where the hand controller goes. They seem to be phasing out the hand controller anyway, as this mount's easier to control via the manufacturer's app, and there's lots of options to control it with common astronomy software. Oh, cold tea. For me, the biggest advantage over the Star Adventurer, apart from the higher weight limit and better tracking accuracy, is that it's got a full go-to capability. It's way less problematic finding the objects of my attentions once I've got it polar aligned and set up. You can also get good polar alignment on this type of mount without having to use the polar scope, which is a bonus, especially if I'm working from a home location, because I live in sort of a Bortle 4 area, and the stars I need to align to are very difficult to see, and sometimes I can't see them due to trees. In short, there's less setup time and more imaging time. The downside is that it's more complicated to use. If you just control it with the Skywatch app, then setup is not too bad, but you can go down a rabbit hole with this type of mount if you opt for computer control. But for various reasons, computer control is what I want to do, so rabbits, here I come. I mean, at heart, I just love anything that interfaces to computer hardware, so basically setting up more or less a astrophotography robot is really one of the things I'm in this for. Now, the visual weight limit on this mount is, according to the vendor, 14 kilograms, which is like 30 pounds, I think. The focal limit is said to be about 700 millimeters, but there are a lot of videos with longer focal length telescopes on this mount. As I said, I don't think there's a clear-cut formula. I'll just have to try different things and find out for myself. As I mentioned, this mount is at the limit of what I would call portable. It isn't too bad to get into and out of the car, but it's not easy, and at my age, it's not going to get any easier. As I mentioned before, astrophotography from here is limited by the terrain, the trees, and weirdly enough, the smoke from all the wood fires in the area in winter, and the forestry fuel reduction burns in the spring. It can make it very hazy at night and not suitable for good photography. The intent in buying this was to future-proof my mount needs while I had the money and still have something I could load into the car and go bush with. It was the limit of my budget plus a little bit because I got a belt drive upgrade with it. I intend to keep the Star Adventurer. Despite its limitations, it's portable and it does a good job if you have time to set it up. Good to take on trips where the intent is not specifically astrophotography, but be nice to get some pictures anyway. Okay, pier or tripod? This is a question I've been mulling over for a while, but before I go on, I should explain what a pier is for the benefit of those that don't know. Basically, a pier is a fixed structure like a pillar of some kind made of concrete or steel that the telescope mount is attached to instead of some kind of portable device like a tripod. They offer an advantage of stability. They tend not to move if you bump them, and a repeatability of setup. You can build one pretty easily out of concrete blocks or something similar, but the main problem is that you need an adapter to attach your mount to the pier. Basically something that mimics this part of the tripod in this particular case. If you live in a spot that has a decent visibility, then a pier mount might be worth considering. Where I live is a bit marginal, but I might still build one anyway. I'll put a link below to a YouTube video that shows a home constructed pier mount so you can see if it's a solution for you. Okay, move that out of the way. Okay, that's all for this episode. If you found it helpful, please give me a like and subscribe if you want to be notified of future scintillating content. The next video will be about the gadgets, tools and doodads I have accumulated in my short time in astrophotography. Be amazed, like me, at how much miscellaneous stuff you get to accumulate just to get going in this field. Thanks for watching and see you next episode. And I'd like to leave you with a deep astronomical thought. Neutron stars may represent some of the most dense matter in the universe, but nebulae, on the other hand, are pretty light. Thank you.